if someone walked into a police station and grabbed a box of evidence tied to a federal investigation and shredded it right after the subpoena hit the desk? Not lost, not misplaced, shredded. So let me ask you this. If nothing was wrong, why did the system disappear at 2:47 a.m.? This is not a normal hearing. This is a controlled detonation inside a congressional room where Robert Garcia doesn't ask questions. He presents a timeline, and that timeline points straight at Stephen Miller. And the subject is not abstract policy, not bureaucratic process, but a database tied to 47 individuals connected to Jeffrey Epstein. Names, movements, border crossings, patterns. Garcia doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't speculate. He places a forensic server log into the record and says calmly, March 17th, 2:47 a.m., partition wipe. Not file deletion, not archive, partition wipe. Then he adds the detail that changes everything. Stephen Miller's credentials accessed that same server at 2:34 a.m., 13 minutes before everything vanished. And here's where the hearing stops being procedural and starts looking like a cross-examination that no one in that room was ready to survive. Because Robert Garcia doesn't move on, he tightens the frame, locks the timeline, and removes every exit. February 24th, this committee issues a subpoena for all records tied to Jeffrey Epstein. March 17th, 3 weeks later, the database is gone. Not corrupted, not migrated, gone. Garcia places the server activity log into the record, and this is where the language matters, because in systems like DHS, words are not casual. Partition wipe means total erasure, no rollback, no recovery, no accident. Then he adds the second document, access logs. 3 administrator logins between 2 and 3 a.m., 1 night shift technician, 1 contractor, and 1 name that should not be there at that hour, Stephen Miller. Not just a login, an IP address traced to his office computer inside the Eisenhower Executive Office building. So now the question is no longer abstract. It is physical. Was Stephen Miller in that office at 2:34 a.m., accessing a classified server tied to an active federal investigation? Or was someone using his credentials inside a secured government system? Because either answer creates a problem that cannot be explained away as routine maintenance. Garcia leans in, voice steady, almost clinical, and asks the question that freezes the room. Why was that server accessed from your office 13 minutes before it was erased? No speculation, no accusation, just a timeline. That doesn't need interpretation. And this is the moment where the hearing breaks because Stephen Miller opens his mouth and nothing comes out. Not denial, not clarification, nothing. Robert Garcia doesn't interrupt that silence, he weaponizes it. He pulls out his phone, opens a stopwatch, and places it in full view of the room. And suddenly, this is no longer about databases. It's about time, about pressure, about what a person does when the record has already spoken. 10 seconds pass and Miller's hands stay flat on the table. 20 seconds, his attorney starts writing, underlining, pushing notes toward him like lifelines that never get used. 30 seconds, and the room begins to shift. Because everyone understands this is not confusion, this is calculation. Garcia doesn't raise his voice, he doesn't fill the silence because silence here is evidence. Silence here is the only answer that cannot be rehearsed. And then he stacks the next layer. He says there were 3 administrator logins, but only one of them came from a policy office terminal. Only one of them came from a credential tied directly to Miller. And only one of them occurred 13 minutes before a partition wipe that erased 2.3 million records, including 47 tied to Jeffrey Epstein. Now the logic tightens. You don't access a classified server at 2:34 a.m. by accident. You don't execute or stand next to an irreversible wipe at 2:47 a.m. by coincidence. And you do not do either of those things 3 weeks after a congressional subpoena without knowing exactly what that data contains. 40 seconds. 50 seconds. 1 full minute. Garcia steps forward, not emotionally, but methodically, like someone who has already tested every possible explanation and found all of them insufficient. He says, someone planned this. He says, someone executed this. And then he says, the part that turns this from suspicion into exposure. There is a whistleblower, an IT systems administrator who was on shift that night, someone who saw the command before it completed. someone who made a decision in real time to copy the entire BC IRS database before it was wiped. Now, the room is no longer quiet. It is compressed, like all the air has been pulled out of it. Because this means the deletion failed. Not technically, but strategically. Garcia gestures behind him, external drive, forensic team, documented chain of custody, and says they have everything. Every record, every entry, every exit, every cross-reference that someone tried to erase. 90 seconds. 100 seconds. And now the silence from Miller is no longer neutral. It is contextual. Because Garcia begins to describe what was inside those 47 records. Not all names, not an open session, but enough to establish pattern. 12 individuals appearing in flight logs tied to Epstein. 8 individuals subpoenaed in civil litigation. 3 individuals whose border crossings align with the exact days Epstein's private jet landed nearby. Now the data is no longer abstract. It becomes movement, presence, proximity. It becomes a map. A map someone tried to delete. 150 seconds. Garcia stops walking, looks directly at Miller, and says, with no emphasis, no theatricality, that is not database maintenance. Then a beat. That is a cover-up. And the silence continues, but now it has weight, now it has direction, now it points somewhere. Because at this point, the question is no longer whether something happened. The question is, who needed those 47 connections to disappear? And this is where the hearing stops being about one man and starts becoming about the system itself. Because when Robert Garcia looks up from the record, he is no longer just addressing Stephen Miller. He is addressing the idea that evidence inside a federal investigation can be erased, and that silence might be enough to survive it. 200 seconds, 210. Garcia doesn't rush because pressure doesn't need speed, it needs inevitability. He says the word slowly, clearly, so there is no confusion in the record. This will be referred for criminal investigation. This will be treated as obstruction tied to a federal inquiry involving Jeffrey Epstein, and this silence will not stay inside this room. 234 seconds. The longest sprint in congressional hearing history. And then, motion, contempt of Congress, referral to the FBI, unanimous. But here is the part that matters, the part that should bother anyone watching this, regardless of politics, regardless of party, because this is not about Democrats or Republicans. This is about whether someone with access, with clearance, with authority, can reach into a system that tracks real-world movements, people crossing borders, timelines, patterns, and attempt to erase it after a subpoena has already been issued. This is about whether evidence disappears or whether the system catches it in time. And in this case, it did. Because one person inside that system decided not to follow the script. One person made a copy. One person preserved what someone else tried to destroy. So ask yourself this, if that backup didn't exist, what would we be talking about right now? Or more precisely, what would we never know existed in the first place? If moments like this matter to you, where the record speaks louder than the answers, like the video, leave your perspective in the comments, share it with someone who still believes process always protects truth, and subscribe. Because this story doesn't end with silence, it starts there.